Welcome to World Mycotoxin Report Impact 2022, a webinar brought to you by DSM Animal Nutrition and Health and Romer Labs. My name is Josh Davis and I'm the Communications Manager at Romer Labs. It's nice to be here again with you, and this time is a little bit different as we have several firsts to celebrate. One of them is that we're presenting this webinar to you for the first time as DSM. Not only is Romer Labs part of DSM, Biomin has also been fully integrated into DSM Animal Nutrition and Health. So before we start, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce today's speakers. Anneliese Müller, Global Product Manager for Mycotoxin Risk Management at DSM. She's responsible for the global survey. And also with us today is Nora Kogelnik, Product Manager at Romer Labs. So a fine welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anneliese, you were here last year to present the Mycotoxin Survey. Now, a lot has happened since then, hasn't it?
Hi. Yes, that's certainly true. So we are now part of a new business line, the Performance Solutions and Biomin. Within the DSM Animal Nutrition and Health Group, we are focusing on improving the sustainability and profitability of animal farming, and it's great to be one team. This also means that the Biomin World Mycotoxin Survey has a new home and a new name now, the DSM World Mycotoxin Survey.
And we're going to be hearing a lot about the survey, of course, in just a few minutes. But first, let me also bring Nora into the conversation just a little bit. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm fine.
Tell us, what have you prepared for us today? What will you be talking about?
First of all, it's nice to be here. Today I'll be saying a thing or two about the important roles that sampling and sample preparation play in achieving accurate mycotoxin testing results.
So thank you. We're all looking forward to hearing about that as well. Now, I promised several firsts to you. Yes, this is, as you can see, the first time that we are doing this in a studio, but more importantly, for the first time, more mycotoxin experts will be joining us later to focus on individual regions: Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, Asia Pacific, and thirdly, the Americas. As always, you can ask questions at any time during the webinar. We will answer all your questions afterwards by email. This doesn't mean that we won't be hearing from you now, though. Several of you asked questions when you registered, and these questions will inform our discussion after the presentations. So, with this, I think we're ready to go. What can you tell us about the current picture of mycotoxin occurrence, Anneliese?
There's a lot to say, but I want to start with giving you a global presentation of the Mycotoxin Survey data 2021. The Mycotoxin Survey is part of the technical services we offer to our customers. We collect data from their feed material samples to help them understand which mycotoxins are found at which concentrations and the potential threat to their animals. In 2021, we counted over 24,000 samples and over 112,500 analyses have been made to detect the 6 main mycotoxins in different raw commodities and in finished feed from over 75 countries. The already high number of over 112,000 analyses performed refers only to the detection of the 6 main well-known mycotoxins. When we consider multi-mycotoxin analysis that we offer, the overall number of analyses will be much higher. Well, let's have a look at the worldwide contamination. Let me explain how to read this map. For all of the subregions, we listed the prevalence for the main 6 mycotoxins analyzed in the boxes. You can see how many samples tested positive for aflatoxins, for cerealenone, deoxynivalenol, T2 toxin, fumonisins, and ochratoxin A. In this world map, the subregions are colored according to the overall risk due to mycotoxin contamination in all of the samples in this subregion. Yellow means that the risk is moderate, orange that risk is high, going up to severe in dark orange and reaching extreme indicated in red. So how do we decide on this risk indication? We define risk thresholds for the different species and the different mycotoxins. This is based on worldwide practical experience, on field trials, on scientific publications and regulations. And if mycotoxin concentrations exceed these risk thresholds, this can already have negative effects on the health of animals. Depending now on how many samples exceed these risk thresholds, we do our coloring scheme of the map. So if less than 25% of the samples contain a mycotoxin above this risk threshold, we will indicate this with moderate risk in yellow. If more than 75% of the samples contain mycotoxin at the concentration above this risk threshold, we will indicate this as extreme risk in red. And what we can see is that most regions and subregions are at severe risk. It's North, Central and South America, Central and Southern Europe, as well as Middle East and Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. In Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, we see a bit reduced risk, but still a high risk. And moving more to the east, we can see that China and Taiwan, as well as South Asia, are at extreme risk. In East Asia and Southeast Asia, risk is severe, and as last year, risk in Oceania is moderate. Let's take a global overview of all of the samples. And here we can see that 61% of the samples are contaminated with a mycotoxin at a concentration that can already harm the animal, the health and the performance of the animal. Therefore, we consider global risk as severe. In 64% of all the samples that have been measured, which have been measured for more than 3 mycotoxins, we can see that more than 1 mycotoxin was found. So the co-contamination is very high. And this means that it can even have a more detrimental effect on the animal health because of possible synergistic effect of the multiple mycotoxins. What is now influencing the occurrence of mycotoxins? Fungi can produce mycotoxins on the crop in the field and during storage. The development of the fungi is strongly dependent on weather conditions during critical times in plant development, such as flowering, and also during harvesting. The temperature, the hours of rain, all this is crucial. And furthermore, environmental stress has a significant consequence on fungi infection. If plants already struggle with difficult conditions, their defenses against fungi can be less effective. Environmental stressors can be floods, droughts, but also insect attacks. And there is a lot of evidence that extreme weather events, which are on the rise due to climate change, cause stress and are a main trigger for mycotoxin occurrence. I was just very briefly looking for extreme weather events in the last year. And as I'm living in Central Europe, of course, I had in mind the heavy flooding in Central Europe, in Germany, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. But those extreme weather events also occurred in Americas and in Asia.
Well, thanks for these insights, Anneliese. For our audience, you mentioned at the beginning the many analyses that you are doing with multi-mycotoxin methods. Will you be discussing this in detail a little bit later?
Mm-hmm. In addition to the 6 main mycotoxins, we also analyzed a selection of our samples for over 50 or even over 500 mycotoxins and different metabolites. And these results will be also included in the Mycotoxin Survey report.
Oh, great. But before we get there, we want to focus a little bit on the Americas right now. So for this, I want to introduce 2 more mycotoxin experts. Bettina Behler-Wöchtel, Global Product Manager in Mycotoxin Risk Management, will tell us a little bit about mycotoxin contamination in North America. For Central and South America, we will get more insights from Tiago Biro, Regional Product Manager for Latin America.
The risk in North America decreased in the second half of 2020 from extreme to severe and stays severe in 2021. We see a slight decrease of prevalence of some of the major mycotoxins compared to 2020, but also a slight increase in others, namely aflatoxins, T2 and fumonisins. The most prevalent mycotoxins found in North American region in 2021 in all samples are deoxynivalenol with 69%, fumonisins with a prevalence of 50%, and zearalenone with a prevalence of 33%. Corn is a very important commodity in regard of mycotoxins. 70% of samples are contaminated with DON and 69% with fumonisins, respectively. You see in the figure on the slide that especially pigs, poultry, and aquatic species are in risk of getting exposed to harmful concentrations of mycotoxins. Before starting with some details, I want to give you a short explanation what you can see on our slides. So on top, you see the number of samples tested for the respective mycotoxin. You see the average contamination of the positively tested samples, as well as the maximum levels found for this community. On the first figure below, you see the prevalence of the major mycotoxins. On the second figure, you see the percentage of either uncontaminated samples, samples contaminated with a single mycotoxin, and samples contaminated with more than one mycotoxin. This co-contamination is of special importance. The risk for health and performance can potentially increase because of potential additive and synergistic effects. In corn grains sampled in the United States, fumonisin is the most prevalent mycotoxin, followed by deoxynivalenol and zearalenone. We see high average levels as well as extremely high maximum levels in these mycotoxins. For example, the maximum levels of SEN and DON were greater than 5,000 ppb and 30,000 ppb for deoxynivalenol, respectively. Aflatoxins are not very prevalent, but in positive samples, the concentration can reach very high levels. DDGS is a valuable feed ingredient, but risky in regards of mycotoxins. Nearly all DDGS samples from the United States are contaminated with zearalenone, deoxynivalenol, and fumonisins, and the co-contamination is high. The maximum levels of zearalenone and deoxynivalenol are extreme, with nearly 1,500 ppb for SEN and more than 40,000 ppb for deoxynivalenol. The takeaway message is: never forget to include DDGS in your mycotoxin risk management plan. Also, in North American corn silage, deoxynivalenol, zearalenone, and fumonisins are the most prevalent mycotoxins. The average of positives is 305 ppb for SEN and 897 ppb for DON. In contrast, risk due to soybeans from the United States is more moderate compared to the corn-derived commodities, except some individual samples, so don't underestimate the risk. In North American grass and hay, the prevalence of mycotoxins is comparably low, compared to corn, of course. About 60% of samples are negatively tested for mycotoxins. However, the risk coming from forage should not be underestimated. Within the positive samples, the average contamination with SEN and DON is high, with 948 ppb and 459 ppb respectively. The maximum level of SEN found is nearly 6,000 ppb. Hence, also forage needs to be included in the testing scheme. You now have a rough overview about the contamination of some important commodities. So, what do our animals finally take in as finished feed? In final feed, including TMR, deoxynivalenol is the most prevalent mycotoxin, followed by fumonisins and zearalenone. The average contamination with SEN, DON, and fumonisins is high, and maximum levels are outstanding. There were some also samples contaminated with extremely high levels of aflatoxins, and this, of course, also enhances the average level. Fortunately, aflatoxins were not that prevalent and not found in such high concentrations in TMR, because, as you know, aflatoxins are transmitted via the milk. Deoxynivalenol, SAN and fumonisins can repeatedly found in concentrations which can harm animals' health and performance. So these were the insights I wanted to share with you about the North American region. If you have any further questions, if you want to go more into detail, or if your commodity of interest was not included in my talk, please feel free to contact us and we will come back to you as soon as possible.
Hello everyone, my name is Thiago. I'm from Brazil and today I will present the Latin American data. In the map, we can see that the contamination risk across the region is medium high. Let's take a close look in the main points of the region. In this section, we can see that aflatoxin, T2 and ochratoxin remain with low positivity. However, zearalenone, deoxynivalenol and fumonisine continue to be the most prevalent mycotoxin in the region. I want to highlight that 79% of the corn analyzed was positive to fumonisine. So corn contributes a lot in the fumonisine contamination of the feed. Now let's see the Latin American wheat grain results. We analyzed over 200 samples and we highlighted deoxynivalenol. The average of the positive was 764 ppbs, which is very high. Maximum over 4,000 ppbs. And it's not just the level, the prevalence of mycotoxins in deoxynivalenol was 80%, the level very high and also the positivity. The number of mycotoxin per sample, we found over 50% contaminated by more than one mycotoxin, 40% one mycotoxin and just 7% below the level of detection. Now let's see the Mexican corn results. We highlighted zearalenone, deoxynivalenol, and fumonisine. We see that the average of the positive for zearalenone, the Mexican corn, was 226 ppbs. It's significant. Deoxynivalenol, 337 ppbs, and fumonisine, almost 2,000. And the positivity of the fumonisine is the one that calls the most attention, because 91% of the samples analyzed of this corn was positive to fumonisine, 66% for deoxynivalenol, and just 18% for zearalenone. So zearalenone had a very high level of contamination, but low positivity. The number of mycotoxin per sample, we see that 67% of the corn analyzed had more than one mycotoxin, 31% one mycotoxin, and just 2% was below limit of detection. Now let's see the finished feed for Honduras. We analyzed over 300 samples of finished feed of Honduras. The average of the positive for zearalenone was over 100 ppbs. For deoxynivalenol, 454 ppbs, and fumonisine, 653 ppbs. So in here we see that the deoxynivalenol and zearalenone is the main ones. Fumonisine had a very low average. But however, we see that the maximum level of contamination achieved almost 19,000 ppbs, which is unbelievable high. The prevalence of fumonisine was 82%, even though the average was low, the positivity was very high. And we see that the deoxynivalenol is very high. 80% of the samples was positive for deoxynivalenol. So we have average high and also positivity very high. In zearalenone, just 34% positivity. The number of mycotoxins per sample, we see that 80% of all samples analyzed had more than one mycotoxin. So we see that the profile of the finished feed of Honduras usually brings more than one mycotoxin. Just 15% one mycotoxin and 5% below limit of detection. So we have to pay attention here, mostly in deoxynivalenol. Let's analyze finished feed for Colombia now. We highlighted zearalenone, deoxynivalenol, and fumonisine once again. We see that the average of the positive of zearalenone is over 100 ppbs, almost 400 ppbs for deoxynivalenol, and almost 900 for fumonisine. I'm gonna highlight again the positivity of fumonisine. 85% of the finished feed analyzed was positive to fumonisine. 73% positive for deoxynivalenol, so we have a high level of deoxyvalenol in this finished feed, and also a very present mycotoxin there. 73% positivity, 48% positivity for zearalenone. So also very high positive compared to other countries. And when you see the number of mycotoxin per sample, we see that 79% of the finished feed analyzed had more than one mycotoxin, just 12% one mycotoxin, and 9% below the limit of detection. Now, let's analyze one of the biggest corn producers in the world, Argentina. We analyzed more than 1,000 samples there. We see that the average of zearalenone is low, 87 ppbs. However, the average of deoxyvalenol was almost 1,000 ppbs, which is very, very high. The fumonizine, the average was almost 2,400, considerable high as well. The maximum of fumonizine in Argentina, we see 83,000 ppbs. It's a lot. When you see the prevalence of this mycotoxin, we see that 74% of fumonizine was positive to fumonizine, 50% positive for deoxyvalenol, which is significant. We see average almost 1,000 ppbs and 50% positive. So we have a problem of deoxyvalenol in the Argentinian corn last year, 40% positive for zearalenone. We see that the number of mycotoxin per sample, 55% of this corn was positive for more than one mycotoxin, 25% one mycotoxin and 20% below limit of detection. So we see that the critical point of the Argentinian corn of 2021 was deoxyvalenol mostly. So let's continue in Argentina, but now we're gonna see the soybean results. We analyzed over 1,000 samples of soybean from Argentina. The average of zearalenone was 61 ppbs, which is not very high. But when you see the positivity, we see that 75% of the overall samples was positive to zearalenone. So it's a very significant positivity. See, deoxyvalenol, the average of the positive was 639 ppbs, which is considerable high, but the positivity was not very high, just 21% prevalence of deoxyvalenol. We have to consider that the corn from Argentina brought a lot of deoxyvalenol, and now we see the average of deoxyvalenol also from the soybean very high. So at the end of the day, we see that grains coming from Argentina from 2021 brought a lot of deoxyvalenol. And the fumonizine, as expected, had a very low average, 683 ppbs, and a very low positivity, 12% prevalence. The number of mycotoxin per sample of the soybean from Argentina also calls our attention. 58% had more than one mycotoxin, 11% one mycotoxin, and 31% below limit of detection. So once again, it's very important to highlight that also the soybean from Argentina presented a very high level of deoxyvalenol. Now we're gonna also see one of the biggest corn producers in the world, the corn from Brazil. We highlight the same mycotoxins, zearalenone, deoxyvalenol, and fumonizine. We see that the average of the positive for zearalenone is over 100 ppbs, deoxyvalenol 415 ppbs, and fumonizine almost 1400 ppbs. In fumonizine, it's important to highlight that the maximum that we found was 14,000 ppbs. This is a lot and causes problem in the field. When you see the prevalence of mycotoxins, we see that 80% of the samples was positive to fumonizine and 43% was positive to deoxyvalenol. As usual, the corn coming from Brazil brings a lot of fumonizine and a lot of deoxyvalenol. The number of mycotoxin per sample is, we see that 45% of the corn analyzed in Brazil had more than one mycotoxin. 45% had one mycotoxin and 10% below limit of detection. Also from Brazil, but now soybean, we highlighted mostly deoxyvalenol. The average of the positive was 758 ppbs, which is considerably high. And also the positivity, 32%. So we see that the main problem of the soybean from Brazil is the oxygenvalenol. And also the profile of multi-contamination of the soybean of Brazil is very good. We see here that 15% of the samples had more than one mycotoxin, 25% one mycotoxin, and 60% had below limit of detection. So the overall problem of the soybean, the Brazilian soybean, is the oxygenvalenol. So now let's analyze the last country. We had corn for Chile, and we highlighted deoxyvalenol and fumonisin. The average of the positive for deoxyvalenol was over 700 ppbs, significantly high. Fumonisin, 2700 ppbs, also very high. And it's not just the levels of a mycotoxin, of this mycotoxin, also the positivity. When you see the prevalence of fumonisin, 68% positive for fumonisin, and also 71% for deoxyvalenol. This is not very common. We see that the corn from Chile, used in Chile, had a very high level of deoxyvalenol and a very high level of positivity as well. The number of mycotoxins per sample, we see that in Chile, 74% of the corn analyzed had more than one mycotoxin. 19% for one mycotoxin and 7% below limit of detection.
Thank you for this detailed information about mycotoxin occurrence. And with this, I want to shift our focus a bit and hear from Romer Labs and product manager Nora Kogelnik, who's joining us again. Hi, Nora.
Hi, Tosh.
So thousands of samples went into making the results for the World Mycotoxin Survey. But let's step back a little bit and have a look at what it takes to get to these results. So how do we get from a specific lot of grain to precise, accurate, and representative result of its mycotoxin concentration?
Thanks, Josh. That's a good question, and it takes us to the heart what we do at Romer Labs. First of all, let me explain what precise, accurate, and representative mean. Precision is about the degree of closeness of measurements with each other, without regard to how the results relate to the actual mycotoxin concentration. In a worst-case scenario, you get precise results that are off-target, as in the target on the upper right. Accuracy refers to the closeness of the measurements to the target reference value. Hence, a result can be neither precise nor accurate, or precise but not accurate, and the other way around. There are a lot of things we have to keep in mind to make sure our results are both accurate and precise. And it all begins with understanding a few basics about representative sampling. Sampling is crucial for any kind of mycotoxin testing, as 88% of result deviation can come from sampling. The reason is that mycotoxins are unevenly distributed in any given grouping of grain. The main objective of sampling is to get a representative sample. Samples used for analysis should have the same average concentration as, for example, an entire 50-ton truckload. The sample for analysis is very small, 10 to 50 grams. Now, which factors can influence the testing variability when it comes to mycotoxin testing? Sampling and sample preparation are complex processes and harbor pitfalls. Each step within sample preparation process introduces a level of variability that contributes to the total variability within a single analytical result. A variety of studies have shown that the sampling contributes to the highest total uncertainty of around 76%, while the analysis itself just accounts for 3%. This highlights the importance of introducing an accurate sampling plan. Over the next few minutes, I would like to explain you a bit why mycotoxins are often hard to sample for. I'll also share with you a few easy steps you can use to get an accurate result. In general, just a small portion of the whole grain lot could be contaminated with mycotoxin-producing fungi. To help you imagine how small the percentage of contamination is, I will give you an example. We call it the BBB problem. BBB stands for parts per billion. 1 BBB is equal to 1 gram of sugar in a swimming pool, or a grain of sand in 22 kilograms. Now you understand how small this amount is and why it's difficult to detect. To receive results representative of your whole grain lot, you need a way to take a sample that is representative of the original lot. Grain kernels contaminated with mycotoxins are not homogeneously distributed, and mycotoxins are often grouped together. These clusters of contaminated kernels are known as hotspots. This is why any sampling plan must be set up to account for the random distribution of such hotspots. A larger number of samples, known as incremental samples, is taken from various locations distributed throughout the lot. The selection of the incremental samples ensures that all grains have an equal chance of being selected. What you see here on the right is the typical shape of an operating curve used to evaluate the bias risk, which we in the analytical world call as false negative, and seller's risk as false positive. What does this tell us? All sampling plans will have some kind of sampling error. Buyer's or consumer's risk describes the probability of a defined sampling plan allowing a batch to be accepted despite the batch exceeding the threshold for contamination. The seller's or producer's risk is that a good batch within acceptable levels of mycotoxin concentration will be misidentified as a bad batch. For comparison, the figure on the left is an illustration of what a purely theoretical operating curve for an error-free sampling plan looks like. Regulations, such as the one you see here from the European Union, define the number of incremental sample and other parameters to reduce risk for buyers and sellers. Now you have completed the sampling, what comes next? A good sample needs good sample preparation before you jump into the analysis. So let's look at why sample preparation is important. Mycotoxin producing molds have several different routes of contamination, meaning that mycotoxin can be found on the surface of grains as well as inside them. Fusarium, for example, grows within the kernel, while Aspergillus grows on the surface. This is why we grind. It breaks the kernels to ensure an even distribution of particles. This improves our ability to detect contaminated particles. So let's say that we now have our 2 kilogram sample. Now, we are confronted with another problem. You cannot test all 2 kilograms. This is why we take smaller subportions of the whole ground sample that we use for the actual test. That's another reason why it is important to have a homogeneous sample. In the last part, I would like to explain why the particle size matters. Here we see the results of a study on the effect of particle size on test results. For the study, samples of corn contaminated with aflatoxin were taken and ground to different sizes using different mesh sieves. To evaluate the effect of particle size, different sample volumes, 5 gram, 10 gram, 20 gram, were taken and then analyzed with HPLC and SMS. We calculated the relative standard deviation or coefficient of variation to determine how dissimilar the results were. The lower the standard deviation, the less variation within the dataset and the more reliable the result. The study shows that the particle size significantly impacts the coefficient of variation. The lowest CV was reached with a 10 gram sample, of which 97% passes through a number 30 mesh. So, what does this mean for you? Keep your grain size small, your sample size large, and your mycotoxin results accurate. Okay. You have collected samples from your lot. You have now your homogeneous subsamples. What comes next? You extract your sample and test the extraction. And I'm here to tell you that mycotoxin testing does not need to be slow or complicated. In this final part of my talk, I would like to show you how simple the extraction and analysis of mycotoxin tests can be. While sampling and sample preparation proved crucial for securing accurate and reliable results, testing is not less important, especially when we have a look at the challenges grain traders, millers or feed millers face. Just think of how busy it can get at grain reception points, especially during busy harvest times, when incoming raw materials need to be tested quickly and as simply as possible, while still maintaining high standards of analytical accuracy. A mycotoxin test kit needs to check several boxes: fast, robust, to withstand the toughest of conditions at reception points, sensitive enough to meet the regulations for food and feed, one that provides accurate and precise results, and by all means simple to use. At Roma Labs, our focus in the last years was to enable just that. The result was the AgroStrip Pro Vortex test system we launched last year. Customers from around the world confirm that it really does all that and more. AgroStrip Pro Vortex is the ideal solution to test raw materials on site for afla, dawn, sun, foam and odor. You can see many of the benefits of the system here, but I'll just mention a couple. It has a quick sample preparation, an assay time of just 4 minutes and the capacity to test 4 samples at once. And most importantly, we eliminated errors with a common extraction and dilution and a very intuitive walk-away operation. You can learn more about AgroStrip Pro Vortex at romalabs.com, and with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Nora. Now, once a good sample has been taken, there are several different analytical methods to choose from. So now we're going to turn from rapid testing solutions to LC-MS-MS-based solutions.
Yes, I want to focus on multi-mycotoxin methods in our last segments, all based on LC-MS-MS, the advantages those methods have and what we can learn from them. So as an example, the Spectrum Top 50 method, it was developed by Roma Labs and was introduced to the market in 2018. In that year, we had around 570 samples analyzed. Now in 2021, we have analyzed over 3,400 samples worldwide. So we have a good data set helping us to learn about the occurrence of many different mycotoxins and metabolites. For many of you, this will be already familiar, but I want to explain it a bit for those who have not heard of it. The Spectrum Top 50 method is a multi-mycotoxin analysis method measuring over 50 mycotoxins, emerging mycotoxins and masked mycotoxins in one run. After the sample is received, it takes 5 working days until you get the results. And this is of course longer than rapid quick tests, but this method has other advantages. The analysis for single mycotoxins can underestimate the synergistic detrimental effects of mycotoxins on animal health and performance. Our long-term monitoring of mycotoxins in different commodities shows that co-occurrence is the rule and not the exception. I will show some examples later. Further, this method is very sensitive to detect moderate concentrations of mycotoxins, and additionally, analysis of finished feed is possible. Detected are the main and frequently occurring mycotoxins, so aflatoxins, cerealenone and its metabolites, several A-trichotizines, the best well-known one T2 toxin, several B-trichotizines, the best well-known one deoxynivalenol, further fumonisins, ochratoxins and several ergot alkaloids, and additionally masked mycotoxins and emerging mycotoxins and other secondary metabolites are detected. Now, what are emerging mycotoxins? They are frequently found on agricultural commodities, they lack regulation, and their toxicity is still under investigation. But some scientific studies already suggested toxic effects. Also, the European Food Safety Authority started to publish some reports on some of the emerging mycotoxins, so showing interest in their occurrence and effects. Now, coming to the masked mycotoxins. They get their name because they cannot be detected by conventional quick analysis methods. It's best to explain this with an example, deoxynivalenol. When the fungi infects a plant and produces this mycotoxin, the plant can, as a defense mechanism, attach a sugar molecule to deoxynivalenol, which is then the masked form. It's DON3-glucoside. Once this masked form is digested and comes to the intestinal tract of the animal, the sugar molecule is cleaved again and the original deoxynivalenol is present, and it can have harmful effects on the animal health. Up to 45% of total deoxynivalenol in cereal samples can be present as DON3-glucoside. Well, let's have a look at the results of all top 50 analyses done in 2021. On this slide, you can see the mycotoxins listed according to their abundance. And to the right, we can see the average of positives, concentration, and the maximum levels. On top is the mycotoxin found most often, which was deoxynivalenol in 60% of the samples. It is colored in orange, which indicates, this color indicates the regulated and guideline mycotoxins. We also see fumonisins and cerealenone, so the usual suspects. In red, you can now see the masked mycotoxins, and in blue, the emerging mycotoxins. Still among the top 5 in the list is DON3-glucoside, found in almost every second sample. Also indicated in red are modified mycotoxins, F15 and 3-acetyl-deoxynivalenol. Those are metabolites of DON, produced by fungi, and again in the gastrointestinal tract, they can be reconverted to the original form of deoxynivalenol. In blue, you see the emerging mycotoxins, and here we can see that moniliformine was the most frequently found, followed by bovaricin, alternariol, and eniatines. So what would we know about effects of those very frequently found emerging mycotoxins? Moniliformine, for this toxin, broilers have been suggested to be very susceptible. It can be genotoxic and have negative effects, particularly to the heart and also muscular weakness. Respiratory distress and immunosuppression have been described. Bovaricin and eniatines showed negative effect on the immune system, and alternariol showed no acute toxicity, but chronic exposure still needs to be investigated. I want to show you one more example of corn silage samples from Poland. This was around 40 samples, so not that many, and we can see the emerging mycotoxins, eniatines and moniliformine very frequently. Eniatine B and B1 are even found in every sample. And what is interesting to see here, it's the high occurrence of the different trichotizines within the samples. So deoxynivalenol was detected in all of the samples with a very high concentration. We see again in red the masked modified mycotoxin DON3-glucoside and 15-acetyl-deoxynivalenol. And we found nivalenol in 68% of the samples. So what I want to say in mentioning all those toxins, that with measuring only deoxynivalenol, we will underestimate the total concentration of trichotizines in these samples. The same is true for the A trichotizines. We found T2 toxin, but at a much higher prevalence, we found HT2 toxin, a metabolite of T2 toxin. It was found in 84% of the samples at the very high average concentration of 200 ppb. So measuring only T2 toxin will underestimate the toxic load the animal is exposed to. Now we are happy that we can offer another multi-mycotoxin method, the most advanced and comprehensive method out there, developed and performed by our cooperation partners at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences. We call it the Spectrum 380 analysis method. This method detects over 500 different mycotoxins and metabolites, as well as bacterial and plant toxins and metabolites. This is not a routine analysis, but it's used in special cases where we cannot find the cause of a problem in a farm. And additionally, it is a commitment to research to get a better picture of the risk that is lying ahead. During the last year, 860 samples were analyzed with this method. We can see that co-contamination is very common. If we look at the graph on the left, we can see on the x-axis the metabolites per sample detected, and on the y-axis we can see the proportion of samples in percent. And here then we can see that in 21% of the samples we found over 60 different metabolites, and on average per sample 42 metabolites. Besides all those mycotoxin analysis methods, we offer our mycotoxin prediction tool. It predicts the risk of mycotoxin contamination in the upcoming harvest. This tool is available for corn harvest, predicting risk of contamination with aflatoxins, deoxynivalenol, fumonisins and cerealenone, and for wheat for the toxins deoxynivalenol and cerealenone. It was developed in close cooperation with universities and relies on models of plant and fungi growth, models of mycotoxin production, crop data, and very important, a detailed weather forecast. Models are adapted with the huge data set of our Mycotoxin Survey. We hope this tool helps our customers to consider mycotoxin risk in advance and make informed decisions. It does not replace mycotoxin testing, though. Our predictions start in March for the Northern Hemisphere and go until October, when we switch to the Southern Hemisphere. Here predictions start from October on until March. Currently, we are focusing on predictions for the second corn harvest in South America. Now we have seen our tools to analyze and detect mycotoxins and even to look at mycotoxin risk in advance. We also offer solutions to counteract the negative effects of mycotoxin contamination on animals. As we know that mycotoxins have a very different structure, it needs several strategies to detoxify them. With this in mind, we offer to the market the well-known Mycofix product line that works with 3 strategies: adsorption, biotransformation, and bioprotection. Adsorption biobentonite is a proven solution. It has gone through the full process of EU authorization for binding aflatoxins. Then we have biotransformation components containing the purified enzyme FUMzyme for the degradation of fumonisins, the microorganism BBSH for the breakdown of trichotizines, both authorized by the EU. Senzyme is a new purified enzyme biotransforming cerealenone into non-toxic metabolites, and the MTV component counteracting ochratoxins. On top of this, the product contains the bioprotection components, which are supporting liver health and immune system of the animal, as well as the gastrointestinal barrier. The Mycofix product line is the most advanced tool for mycotoxin control. For more information about our product, please contact a DSM representative.
We're almost at the end of this webinar, but we don't want to stop without hearing a little bit about what's on our audience's mind. Now, Nora and Anneliese, you've seen some of the questions that members of the audience have asked. Let's start with you, Anneliese. Which question particularly caught your attention?
One of the questions that particularly caught my attention is, can you please explain synergistic effects of mycotoxins? And I think that's a very good question. And synergistic effects, it means that if multiple mycotoxins occur, the effects on the animal will not be the sum of the individual toxins, but it will be a higher effect. So if we put it in math, which is easier to explain, 2 plus 3 would not be 5, but would be more than 5.
Okay, so this means that if you have 2 mycotoxins with synergistic effects, that means that whatever effects they have individually, right, when they're together, it's going to be more than just what those 2 effects are.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. All right. Tricky topic, synergistic effects, right? But we get a lot of questions about this every year, it seems, right? Something that's definitely on our audience's mind. Nora, which question stood out to you?
One question that caught my eye was if agar-strip or vortex can be used on matrices which has not been validated yet.
Aha.
I cannot recommend to use a test kit on a matrix which is not validated. Why is that? I would then contact a SOS representative and then we can do a matrix check to see if the test kit is working on that type of sample.
Is this because of the problems with matrix effects?
Yes, it is. So each matrix behaves different on the test strip, and therefore we have to see in our laboratory how the sample works on our lateral flow devices.
All right. We also get a lot of questions about matrix effects, so
True.
Thank you. Yes, it's certainly a perennial favorite. All right, and I think we have time for just one more question. I'll just throw it back to you, Anneliese. Was there anything else that stood out to you? Any other question you'd like to
Just
answer?
one other question, because we had a focus on this toxin in the last time. It's about cerealenone and how does it affect animals, ruminants, pigs, and poultry. And because time is short already, I want to focus on pig, which is the most sensitive species for this mycotoxin. Cerealenone, it can interact with the receptors, with the estrogenic receptors, and thus cause an estrogenic effect in the animal. So it's mainly affecting the reproductive system. And in pigs, this can range from a shifted estrus to reduced weight of the offspring. It can influence the morphology of the uterus and the ovaries. It can lead to a swollen vulva, but also in boars it can have an effect like reduced sperm motility. So it's really affecting all the reproductive system of the animal.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And with that, we're approaching the end of our webinar. As usual, you'll be receiving a few goodies from us. You'll receive an email including links to today's recording, the brand new DSM Mycotoxin Survey annual report, the latest issue of Spot On from Romer Labs, and a link to a short on-site mycotoxin testing video within the next 24 hours. You'll be prompted to answer a short survey on today's webinar. It should take about 2 minutes to complete. By providing your feedback, you allow us to improve our webinar program and identify future topics for discussion. We would appreciate your taking the time to complete the survey. It remains for me to thank our speakers, Anneliese Müller from DSM.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also great thanks to my colleague Nora Kogelnik from Romer Labs.
Thank you, Josh.
This is Joshua Davis from Romer Labs saying visit us at dsm.com/anh or romerlabs.com to learn more about how we can help you develop a mycotoxin detection and management strategy tailored to your needs. Thanks for your attention and your interest, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.